Thank you for taking my call. Before we continue, could you say the first and third digits of your security PIN? Oh, I didn't catch that. Sorry. That's the second and fourth, please. Okay, lovely. All gone through. Did you see what I did there?
It's a scam. Never reveal your full security PIN, even if you think it's your bank calling. Learn how to protect yourself from fraud.
So many of you write to us with dreadful, shocking experiences of being scammed. Of course, we read all and investigate whatever and wherever we can. But it's also fair to say that lots of you who comment on our stories question whether those who've fallen prey to the scammers should have thought twice before being duped into handing over their cash. Well, in this next story, one woman who lost one of the largest amounts of money we've ever reported on has really done some soul-searching on that front. And I went to meet her to find out more about her quest to understand what exactly went through her mind that day and tipped her into making a decision that has damaged her life forever. In February 2021, Britain was in lockdown, and in sleepy Somerset, drama therapist Alice Allen and her husband were settling down to another quiet evening when the phone rang.
This voice said he was from the fraud department of Lloyd's and that there were various accounts in the branch that were being accessed.
Alice was dumbfounded, but as a Lloyd's customer, felt compelled to hear more. And before she knew it, the caller had patched her through to two men who claimed they were specialist investigators from the Financial Conduct Authority. They told her that a network of banking staff across Alice's town were stealing account holders' cash for themselves, and her money was under threat. But if she cooperated with FCA fraud agents at the end of the phone, she could stop them.
Their plan was to get me to help them to get these criminals arrested. And they created a sense of civic duty in me.
Alice was nervous, unsure whether she could trust the men on the phone.
I did ask them for identification, and the FCA fraud agent said go to the FCA website, which I did, and he said now look at the telephone number, and he said now look at the telephone number on the screen on your handset, and it was identical.
The two supposed FCA men, who called themselves Brian and Chris, then sent Alice on a path that would eventually lead to financial ruin. And they truly reeled her in. The fraudsters realised that Alice believed them totally, and they talked for days.
There were times when they were ringing just to reassure me that everything was going according to plan, and then the next phone call, something would have gone wrong. So there was a sense of urgency.
Over the weeks, they built a relationship that cemented the deception in Alice's mind.
They were always extremely polite and charming. You know, it's a sort of human touch they were giving me. I remember Chris ringing me early in the morning. He said, yes, and I haven't even had breakfast yet, but I'll manage to get down to the cafe. There's a wonderful cafe at the foot of the FCA building.
They sent paperwork to Alice in the post on FCA-headed paper. It confirmed that her money was under threat. It wasn't just Alice who was convinced, her husband was as well. Together, isolated in lockdown, they continued to question the situation. But in reality, they were totally under the scammer's spell.
You're constantly trying to make the right decision. And of course, you know, when stress levels are very high, you have to make very quick decisions and you don't think very clearly.
After weeks of laying the foundations, the scammers moved into the final phase of their deception. They insisted that the only way for Alice to save her life savings was to go to her local bank branch and transfer all of it into a safe account they had set up before the supposedly corrupt staff inside the bank could take it for themselves.
He said, just remember, you know, these people are trying to take your money, so you mustn't say anything about this investigation. Just answer the questions the way I've told you to answer them, and it'll be all absolutely fine. I was being controlled. My mind was being controlled by these fraudsters. because they were just being too clever. And they had an answer for everything, and they had a plan, and they made it look as if they were taking great care of me and my funds. And so they had got my complete trust.
In fact, the scammers were trying to foil the very system there to protect customers like Alice. Bank staff are now trained to question very carefully customers making suspicious transactions. Alice's scammers knew what was coming next and how to get around it. I want to know more about their tactics and the power they held over Alice. So I've come to meet her to find out just what happened.
He had told me exactly or what I would be put through at the bank, and he told me exactly what to say.
So he groomed you?
He groomed me.
As to what to say?
And he said, just remember, you will very likely be talking to somebody who we have under investigation. He said there is a network and there are people in every branch who are in this network.
It's like a movie, isn't it?
It is.
Once at the branch trying to withdraw her money, so suspicious that they held off the transfer. But the scammers had primed her for that. And when the police visited to check that she was sure she wanted to move her money, she stuck to the cover story that the scammers had prepared with her, that she was shifting her cash because of changing investment plans. But all these questions were taking time, and the scammers were getting impatient. And all the time with the fraudsters on your back saying, what happened, what's the delay?
They were raising my levels of anger and dissatisfaction with the bank, saying, you shouldn't be putting up with this sort of attitude. It's your money. The bank staff should be doing exactly what you want. You're the customer.
But the bank would still not let her make the large transfer in one go. So the fraudsters came up with a solution.
They said, you'll be able to transfer £25,000 out of each of those accounts daily.
You must have been petrified, though.
It was terrifying.
Over the space of 3 weeks, Alice painstakingly visited her branch, moving her money piece by piece to an account set up by the fraudsters where they told her it would be safe. Except, of course, this account was controlled by the criminals. And as soon as Alice's money landed, they whisked it away, buying untraceable Bitcoin. Overall, how much money did you lose?
£525,000.
Shocking. Over £500,000 of Alice's money gone. It was only when her son came to visit that Alice realised she'd been conned. He noticed that the email address one of the scammers had been using to masquerade as an FCA officer was actually fake.
And there was just a very small difference, but the difference was there. Well, I just fell apart. I couldn't believe what I'd done. I couldn't believe that I had been so stupid. It was devastating.
Of course.
Absolutely devastating. Because I knew that I'd lost all that money. And it was my fault.
The FCA says that it would never, ever contact people asking them to part with their money. And if someone does, it's likely to be a scam. But the problem is, Alice was so deep into the story that the scammers had woven for her that it all seemed plausible enough. You are a lady who gives the impression of being very together. How did you question yourself?
It went over and over it in my mind, and I wondered about the psychology of it.
So much so that Alice set about researching the subject, which led her to make contact with cyber psychologist Dr. Alison Attrell-Smith from the University of Wolverhampton, who's tried to help Alice make sense of exactly what happened.
We are very quick to judge the victim and say, oh, they were silly, they were stupid, I would never fall for that. But Alice is such a good example of it happening to anyone. You know, she's a very smart woman. They managed to convince her that the whole bank was corrupt.
But I'm trying to understand how they managed to get that level of control.
She was caught in almost like this whirlwind. One of the real key things is that they never gave her space to think about what was happening. As soon as she had a little bit of downtime, they were back on the phone.
What benefit do you think it is to the public at large for somebody like Alice to come out and actually bare her soul.
If we can have more people talk about what's happened to them, then we can understand more how the scammers are operating from a psychological perspective. And that will then help us develop red flag signals. And we can only do that if people speak out.
Alice has managed to recoup £98,000 of her money that she transferred. As for the rest, a huge £427,000. Well, Alice's bank Lloyds told her they simply could not recover it. When we spoke to Lloyds, it told us that it did everything it could to protect Alice, including repeatedly blocking attempted payments, speaking to her in branch and over the phone, writing to her to explain its concerns, and arranging for the police to speak to her on 2 occasions. Lloyd said that it has a great deal of sympathy for Alice and stressed that a bank will never ask someone to move money to a different account or say that they need to give a false reason for making a payment. If anyone does, it's definitely a scam. Detective Sergeant Mark Cannonier is an expert in economic crime and says what happened to Alice is both common and all too understandable. So how much psychology is used here with the scammers in particular?
I think it's very much about psychology. It's about them controlling the mind of the victim. So they will do all sorts of things. They'll even research their victims online, see if they've got a social footprint, they've got grandchildren, they've got pets, that they can kind of humanise that conversation to the point where the victims think they're there to help them. The reality is it's the total opposite. They're trying to exploit them for as much money as they can.
So if the police do get involved, if they're called in by the bank or called in by an individual, I mean, how much teeth do you actually have to help?
So there's no legislation, no power that affords me as a police officer to say, I'm not allowing you to make that transaction. We can only advise. Ultimately, the decision is there with the individual who holds the power, because it's up to them what they do with their money.
Sadly for Alice, there's no choice left but to move on. How are you coping with it?
I have to carry on with life. And I do have the support of my family. So, yes, I have to just put it to one side and carry on with my life.
And pray that you get somewhere.
Yeah.